Hey friends, welcome back to another Wellness Wednesday. So for the past couple of months, I have been experimenting with adding a few more carbs back to my diet. And the reason I started experimenting with adding a few more carbs back to my diet is because I did a whole bunch of work on my gut health. I addressed my SIBO, did a few rounds of antimicrobials, and really saw some incredible changes in my digestion. I had been on a very ketovore, meat-heavy, plant-light diet for several years, and that did not resolve my digestive issues. It definitely helped with symptoms. If I cut out all plants and all fiber, I found that my digestive issues went away. But the problem was I couldn't really have very much of a variety in my diet. I had to really stick really closely to nearly all meat. And that was not something that I was super excited about doing for long term. So I decided to experiment with some just other ways to improve my digestion beyond just removing the triggers. I wanted to find a way, or to see if it was possible, to actually change my body in such a way that those things weren't as much of triggers anymore. So I have shared this gut health journey over the past several months now. It was over the summer, I believe, that I first started exploring the idea of SIBO and then starting on the rounds to get rid of SIBO. And so if you're interested in finding the whole journey and hearing all the details from the very beginning, I do have a playlist that you can check out if you're interested in that. But just as a condensed version, I went through my rounds of antimicrobials, and after the third one, it took a while. It wasn't like an overnight thing. It took a while, but after the third one, I really saw a huge change in my digestion where I could just tolerate so many more things than I could before. And so it was very exciting. And I started experimenting with all kinds of things. I kind of took it as the opportunity to reinvent my diet. I had created my diet before based on the things that I was intolerant to. Well, that was one of the things. Also choosing foods that I knew were healthy for my body. So there were a lot of factors, but one big factor was keeping the trigger foods out, the things that made me feel bad. But then once I worked on my digestion and my gut, and these things didn't make me feel bad anymore, I kind of had to reinvent my diet and figure out what was worth adding and what wasn't. And, like I have said before, just because I can digestively handle something doesn't necessarily mean it should be part of my everyday diet. So I just kind of have been in a place of reinventing and trying to figure out what my new baseline diet is going to be. And even though I have been on a very keto, low carb diet for many years now, I am not one who is married to the label of keto. I do not say that keto is the perfect diet for every person. I think there's different stages of life, different types of bodies that can handle different things. And so since my body changed and my gut health improved, I was definitely open to the idea that maybe I didn't need to be on a keto diet anymore and that I could handle, a little bit more carbs. Like I said before, I had the feeling that I probably wouldn't go anywhere beyond what would be considered low carb, like 100 grams of carbs or less. I figured I'd still stay somewhere in that range, but I was really open to just whatever my body was going to be happy with in this new state. And through all of this experimentation, one really important piece that I don't know that I could have done it without is my CGM, my NutriSense glucose monitor. Testing out different foods using the CGM has been incredibly eye-opening. Just the incredibly vast difference in response I can have from the exact same amount of carbs from one type of food to the exact same amount of carbs from another type of food. So it was just super eye-opening to see what my body could handle as far as my blood sugar goes and what it couldn't. But like I have been mentioning throughout this experiment, first of all, I have been mentioning it's been an experiment and that I could change and I could go back to my ketovore ways at any moment if things go south. I am not married to the idea of keto. I am not married to the idea of adding carbs. It all has to do with what my body body can handle and what makes me actually feel my best. And one piece of information that I knew was going to be super important and that I was super curious about, also you guys were super curious about it, I got several comments saying that you couldn't wait to find out, is what my fasting insulin would do as I started adding more carbs. So like I mentioned, I have during this experiment kept my carb level below the 100-gram mark most days. There were a few odd days where it did go over 100, but usually under 100 and usually above 50. So somewhere between that 50 and 100-gram range is where I've been as I've been experimenting. And that is up from anywhere between 10 and 30 total carbs previously. So when I was doing more ketovore. Now, before I share what my fasting insulin is now, I want to give you some context about where it was back in October when I got it tested for the first time. So back in October, that was about a month, a little over a month, maybe about 6 weeks after I started my first SIBO round. And if you guys remember, when I did do my SIBO rounds, I intentionally added more vegetable carbs to my diet because when you're doing the antimicrobials to kill SIBO, you don't want the SIBO to be dormant. You want to actually be feeding it some fiber so it's alive and active, and then that makes it easier to kill. So I intentionally started eating more vegetables. I didn't add in like starchy carbs at that point or sugar carbs or anything like that. It was more just the vegetables that I increased. So I had been eating more vegetables for about 6 weeks. I had also added the L-reuteri fermented dairy into my diet for about 6 weeks prior to this insulin test as well. And when I got my insulin tested back in October, after 6 weeks of eating a few more vegetable carbs and eating the L-reuteri fermented dairy, my insulin was 2.8. which is very, very low. There are some conventional doctors who would say it's too low and that I needed to eat more carbs. So I'm very confident that I can handle those extra vegetable carbs and that I can handle the L-reuteri fermented dairy. No issues there whatsoever. So the main difference between that 2.8 insulin level and the insulin level I'm going to share that I just got done is that I have added those additional starchy carbs. And when I got my insulin tested just about a week ago, it had jumped up to 7.9. So nowhere near hyperinsulinemia, nothing dangerous, but I had it in my mind that if my insulin was still 5 or below, I was going to be happy with it and I wasn't going to necessarily make any changes to my experimentation with the carbs. But it was a little higher than I am comfortable with. I would like to see it at that 5 level or below. So I will throw in the caveat here that I have been in a season of experimenting. And with the experimenting, there comes failed experiments. And so there have definitely been times over the last 2 months where I ate things that my body did not like and that did spike my blood sugar higher than I wanted it to, and that I would not add to my regular diet. So seeing that 7.9, it does tell me that I need to make some changes to not let it get higher and hopefully to pull it back down a few points to get down to that 5 or below again. And I don't think that I need to necessarily go back as far as, the 10 to 30 total carbs that I was at before, simply because, like I said, I have been in this experimenting stage where I have spiked my blood sugar and it did go higher than I want it to on a regular basis. So what I did decide to change is just to kind of cool it on the experimenting with the higher carb foods and sticking to the few higher carb foods that I've already tested and that seem to do really well with my blood sugar, like beans, for example. And then, like I said, all the other vegetables that I've tested out that I've done well with, onions, carrots, things like that. So I expect that's going to keep my total carbs somewhere around 50 to 60. That's kind of my guess. And again, I'm really, really curious to see how that eating that way is going to affect my insulin levels in, about 3 months from now. So like I said, the CGM that I use from NutriSense has been super valuable to me in this whole process, in learning what spikes my blood sugar and what doesn't. And like I have said before, I do not think that blood glucose is the only health marker that matters. Obviously, insulin is very important. And if there was a continuous insulin monitor, that would be so incredibly fascinating. And I hope that is a technology that comes out really soon. But as of now, like the fasting insulin, I think is the next best thing. So that's why, I had in my mind, I'm going to test my insulin. I'm going to see if, I'm seeing this stuff on my blood glucose monitor and, learning that these certain foods are blood sugar friendly for me. But I also want to make sure that they're insulin friendly for me. And from this last test that I got, it showed me that the amount of experimenting and the amount of spiking up my blood sugar that I did do over the last 2 months was not as insulin friendly for me as I would like. And I do think that cooling it with the experimentation for a little while and just sticking to the things that my blood sugar seems really happy with, I think it will, pull down that insulin, a couple points. So it has been a really good experiment. I'm really happy that I've done this. I've learned so much about my body, like what it can and can't handle. So I'm going to continue on with having a few extra carbs in my diet, bumping it up a little bit from that ketovore, very meat focused diet, but not going as far as I have the last couple of months. And it's really, really good for me, I think, to find those limits and learn about amounts of food that are good for me or not good for me, because I've always, had in my mind that if I could just find perfection in a diet or have a list of perfect foods, I could just eat as much as I want of any of them and everything would be fine. But really, the dose makes the poison in a lot of things. And with the carbs, I can handle some, and I think some are good for me. I think some help me to feel better digestively, help feed my gut bacteria. I also think that they help my energy. But there's this really fine line where if I go past it, I start getting negatives. And learning the limits and the amounts and the types has been just a huge benefit to me and kind of a shift in my mindset. So that is my update and my insulin levels currently. As always, it is a journey and I love being able to bring you guys along. Hope you guys enjoyed the video and I will just see you again in the next one.